The transport bay doors parted with a low mechanical sigh, releasing a gust of sterilized air that smelled faintly of ozone and something sharper, something engineered to erase the memory of blood. Inside, the medical frigate pulsed with quiet precision, soft lights shifting along curved metallic walls, diagnostic drones drifting like patient ghosts between rows of wounded soldiers. Everything moved with purpose, everything except the man being carried in at the very end. Salon didn't look like the others, not because he was less injured, quite the opposite. Two med units guided his stretcher forward, their articulated arms adjusting his position with clinical care, though one of them paused briefly, recalibrating as if unsure where to begin. His armor had been cut open in several places, the scorched fabric peeled back to reveal skin marked with overlapping scars. Some old, some disturbingly new. Some difficult to categorize. A nearby soldier groaned as a fracture was sealed with a flash of blue light. Another was already laughing weakly, pumped full of relief chemicals. Normal reactions, expected patterns. Then there was Solon. One eye cracked open as the overhead lights passed across his face. He squinted upward, blinking slowly, as if mildly inconvenienced rather than severely injured. "Did we win?" he asked. One of the med units paused, its central lens adjusted focus. Outcome, mission success, casualties within acceptable parameters. Solon nodded faintly. Good. Would have been awkward otherwise. The unit did not respond. It logged the statement anyway. Further inside the bay, Dr. Vexa stood at a suspended console, her long, pale fingers moving in precise, efficient motions across shifting holographic readouts. Her posture was perfectly aligned, her expression composed to the point of near stillness. The subtle curve of her elongated ears angled slightly backward, a sign to those who knew her species of concentration sharpened to its finest edge. She did not look up immediately when Solon was brought in. She didn't need to. The system flagged him before her eyes ever moved. A flicker, a pause, then a cascade of alerts that did not follow any known diagnostic sequence. Vex's gaze shifted. The stretcher stopped beneath the primary scanner, and the overhead ring descended with a soft hum, bathing Solon in a lattice of shifting light. For a moment, everything seemed routine. Then the scanner hesitated. Not malfunctioned, hesitated. Its readings stuttered across the display. Fracture markers appearing, vanishing, reappearing in conflicting positions. Internal scans layered over each other like overlapping timelines, none fully aligning. Vexa stepped forward. "Recalibrate," she said calmly. The system complied. The scan restarted. The results were worse. She narrowed her eyes slightly, stepping closer as the projections stabilized just enough to be readable. Bone structures appeared in ghostly detail, highlighted in sharp contrast, and nearly every section told a different story. Multiple fractures, healed incorrectly, reinforced by scar tissue, broken again. Some bones showed signs of microfusion where the body had attempted to compensate without proper alignment. Others had simply adapted. This was not a single injury. This was a pattern, a history. Behind her, one of the assistant drones emitted a soft, uncertain tone. "Doctor, classification error." Vexa didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the projection, tracing the jagged lines of healed damage, the unnatural symmetry of repeated trauma. She had seen catastrophic injuries before. She had reconstructed bodies from worse. But this was not survival. This was persistence. On the stretcher, Selene shifted slightly, wincing just enough to acknowledge pain without giving it importance. He tilted his head toward the glowing projection of his own skeleton. "That looks not ideal," he murmured. Vexa finally spoke, her voice controlled but edged with something new. "You have 21 fractures." Solon considered that. "Huh?" A pause. "Is that a lot?" The assistant drone made a small clicking sound, as if unsure how to process the question. Vexa turned her head, her sharp gaze settling fully on him for the first time. Up close, her features were striking in their precision, smooth, almost too symmetrical, her long ears framing a face that betrayed nothing easily. "You are aware," she said slowly, that a single untreated fracture can result in permanent impairment. Solon gave a faint shrug, or tried to. It translated into a minimal shift of his shoulders before he winced again. Yeah, I figured something felt off. Vexa stared at him. Not clinically, not entirely. Something about the ease in his voice, the absence of urgency, of concern, did not align with anything in her experience. Patients with lesser injuries displayed panic, denial, bargaining. He displayed mild curiosity. She gestured, and the scan rotated, highlighting the layered damage along his ribs. These have been broken, she said, at least 4 separate times. Solon followed the motion with his eyes. Ah, that explains the breathing thing. The, breathing thing. Yeah, sometimes it hurts when I breathe. A silence settled in the bay. Not the efficient silence of medical work, but something heavier, uncertain. Vexa stepped closer, her gaze sharpening. Why? She asked, each word precise. Did you not seek treatment? Solon blinked at her, not confused, just thinking. After a moment, he gave a small, almost apologetic smile. Didn't seem important at the time. The answer hung there, weightless and impossible. For the first time in a very long while, Dr. Vexa found herself without an immediate response, and she did not like that. The scanner continued its slow rotation above Solon, but now every pulse of light felt less like routine and more like interrogation. Vexa adjusted the display with a flick of her fingers, isolating individual regions of damage, layering timelines over one another. The system struggled to keep up, tagging fractures with different estimated ages, then revising them as if second-guessing itself. That is not possible, one of the assistant drones said quietly. Vexa did not look at it. Clarify. The system cannot determine a consistent recovery pattern. Healing intervals are irregular. Solon shifted slightly on the platform. Irregular sounds better than catastrophic. The drone paused. That is not an option currently available. He exhaled slowly. You should add it. Makes things sound more optimistic. Vexa ignored the exchange, though her ear twitched faintly, an almost imperceptible sign of distraction. She expanded the scan along his left arm. The humorist displayed at least 3 separate fracture lines, each healed at slightly different angles. You continued to use this limb, she said. Solon lifted his arm a few centimeters, as if testing it. It still works. It should not. Yeah, he agreed. It says that sometimes. Vexa's gaze snapped toward him. It? My arm, he said simply. We have an understanding. The assistant drone emitted a low, confused tone. Vexa exhaled slowly through her nose, then tapped another command. The scanner intensified, projecting a deeper internal image. Organs, connective tissue, microscopic scarring. Patterns emerged, subtle but undeniable. His body had adapted in ways that bordered on defiance. Not optimized, not efficient, just refusing to stop. She stepped closer again, her voice quieter now, more focused. You experienced internal trauma here, she said, highlighting a cluster near his ribs. Significant, possibly lethal. Solon glanced at it. Oh, that one. Yeah. You recall the incident? Vaguely, there was an explosion, or maybe 2. It gets blurry after the second one. Vexa stared at him. You are uncertain whether there were 1 or 2 explosions? Well, he said, tilting his head slightly. The first one made a loud noise. The second one made everything else a loud noise. So technically, both count. For a brief moment, the assistant drone stopped recording. Vexa pressed her fingers against the console, the light beneath them pulsing faintly as she processed the data again. Her mind moved quickly, categorizing, analyzing, rejecting possibilities. This was not a case of negligence alone. There was something else, something deeper in the pattern of his survival. She turned the projection again, isolating his spinal column. The room fell quieter. Microfractures lined several vertebrae, some partially healed, others reinforced with dense scar tissue that had formed in irregular, almost desperate ways. You continued movement with this damage, she said. Solon gave a small shrug. I try not to think about it too much. That is not a valid medical strategy. It's been working so far. Vex's eyes narrowed. You define this as working. He considered that for a moment. Well, he said slowly, I'm still here. There was no arrogance in his tone, no pride, just a simple statement. That unsettled her more than anything else. She stepped back slightly, folding her arms behind her. Your body has sustained cumulative trauma beyond standard survivability thresholds. Solon nodded. Sounds about right. You should not be functional. Give it time, he said lightly. I'm working on it. The assistant drone made a sharp clicking noise. Humor detected. Context inappropriate. Solon turned his head toward it. You should relax. It's good for your circuits. I do not have circuits. See? Already tense. For the first time, Vex's lips pressed together in something dangerously close to amusement. It vanished almost immediately, replaced by her usual composed neutrality. She stepped forward again, lowering the scanner intensity. You will remain here for extended stabilization, she said. Your condition requires... No. The word came out quietly but clearly. Vexa paused. Solon looked at her, his expression still calm, but more focused now. I can't stay long. You are in no condition to leave. I've been in worse. That is not a justification. It's a pattern, he corrected gently. Vexa held his gaze. There was no defiance in him, no challenge, just certainty. That made it harder to dismiss. She adjusted the display again, bringing up his vital signs. They were stable. Not optimal, but stable in a way that defied expectation. How long, she asked. Have you been operating in this condition? Solon thought for a moment. A while. A quantifiable measure would be preferable. He glanced up at the ceiling, as if counting. A few missions, maybe more. I lose track. Vexa studied him carefully, searching for exaggeration, for inconsistency. There was none, just a man who treated survival like routine maintenance. She turned away slightly, her fingers moving across the console again, pulling up mission logs, cross-referencing timestamps. The data began to align, fragmented reports, incomplete records, each one marking an incident that should have ended differently, but didn't. Behind her, Solon shifted again, wincing as he adjusted his position. He exhaled slowly, then glanced toward the assistant drone. Hey, he said, do you have anything for pain? The drone responded immediately. Administering analgesic. No, Vexa said sharply. The drone froze mid-motion. Solon blinked. That seemed promising. Vexa turned back to him. Your pain responses are valuable diagnostic indicators. He stared at her for a second. Then he gave a small, tired smile. Of course they are. There was no sarcasm in it. That made it worse. Vexa hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before speaking again. You will endure temporary discomfort. Solon nodded. I'm familiar with the concept. The silence that followed felt different now. Not clinical, not controlled. Something quieter, something shifting. Vexa turned back to the display, but her movements had slowed. Her precision was still there, but something underneath it had changed, an awareness she could not easily categorize. Behind her, Solon closed his eyes again, his breathing steady despite everything. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. So, 21 fractures, right? Vexa did not turn. Yes, he nodded faintly. Not my best score. And this time, despite herself, Vexa paused, just long enough to almost understand the joke. The lights above the medical platform dimmed slightly as the scanner withdrew, its hum fading into the background rhythm of the frigate. New instruments descended in its place, thin articulated arms tipped with glowing emitters, each calibrated for precise reconstruction. They hovered for a moment, waiting. Vexa did not give the command immediately. Instead, she stood still, reviewing the data once more. Not because she needed to confirm it, because she was trying to understand it. Behind her, Solon opened one eye again. You're doing that thing, he said. Vexa did not turn. Clarify. The staring, he replied. Doctors do that when they either found something interesting or something expensive. A brief pause. Which one am I? Vex's fingers moved across the console. You are neither. Good, he said. I can't afford interesting. The assistant drone recorded the statement, then paused as if reconsidering whether it was relevant. Vexa finally gestured, and the first of the instruments descended towards Solon's torso. A soft beam of pale blue light spread across his ribs, mapping structure before initiating repair. "This will be uncomfortable," she said. Solon glanced down at the glowing emitter. "Define uncomfortable." The beam intensified. He inhaled sharply. "Oh," he added after a moment. "That kind." The system began its work, micro-adjustments, subtle realignments, guiding bone fragments into more stable positions without fully reconstructing them. It was not a complete correction, not yet. His body would resist aggressive intervention. Vexa monitored the process closely, her gaze shifting between the live scan and his physical responses. His muscles tensed, his breathing adjusted, but he did not complain. Not really. "That one's new," he muttered after a few seconds. "It is not," Vexa replied. "It was previously fractured in 3 locations." "Ah," he said. "Then it's just reintroduced itself." The assistant drone emitted a soft processing tone. "Clarification. Bones do not possess self-awareness." Solon turned his head slightly. "You'd be surprised." Vexa ignored them both, increasing the precision of the beam. The fracture lines began to stabilize, the chaotic layering of damage smoothing into something more coherent. Not perfect, but improved. She moved to the next region, his shoulder. The scan projected a complex web of microtears and calcified reinforcements, the result of repeated strain far beyond safe limits. "You continued combat operations with this damage," she said. Solon shrugged. Again, a minimal motion. "I didn't want to make it worse by resting on it." Vexa stopped. Slowly she turned her head. "That statement is illogical." He considered that. "Yeah, it sounded better in my head." For a moment there was nothing but the quiet hum of machinery. Then Vexa resumed. The emitter shifted, focusing on the shoulder joint. This time the adjustment was more intricate, realigning connective structures, reinforcing weakened points with controlled energy pulses. The process required precision and patience, 2 things Vexa had in abundance. What she did not have was familiarity with this kind of patient. Most soldiers resisted treatment out of pride, fear, or urgency. They argued, they questioned. Solon did none of those things. He simply endured and occasionally made jokes about it. "You are not exhibiting standard stress indicators," she said after a moment. Solon opened both eyes now, looking at the ceiling. "Is that bad?" "It is unusual. I get that a lot." Vexa adjusted the scan again, isolating his neural responses. Pain signals were present, strong, consistent, but his cognitive reactions did not match expected patterns. He was not suppressing pain. He was accepting it, as if it were part of the process. She frowned slightly. "That's a new expression," Solon said. Vexa blinked once. "What is?" "The face," he replied. "You're doing a thinking thing." "I am always thinking." "Yeah, but this one looks more personal." Vexa did not respond. Instead, she increased the intensity of the scan slightly. Solon immediately tensed. "Ah," he said through a controlled breath. "There it is." "There what is?" "The part where you prove you're still in charge?" Vex's eyes narrowed just slightly. "This is a medical procedure." "Sure," he said, "but it has attitude." The assistant drone paused again. "Clarification, medical procedures do not possess—" "Don't," Solon said gently. "You'll hurt its feelings." For a fraction of a second, Vex's lips almost moved. Almost. She shifted focus again, this time to his lower torso. The scan revealed deeper internal scarring, evidence of impacts that had not just broken bone, but disrupted entire systems. "You should have experienced organ failure," she said. Solon nodded. "That did come up." "And yet—" "Yeah," he said. "I had other plans." Vexa studied him carefully. There it was again. Not arrogance, not defiance, just persistence, as if survival was less a decision and more a habit. She turned slightly, stepping closer to the platform itself. Her gaze moved from the projection to him directly, studying the subtle tension in his expression, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. You do not prioritize your own structural integrity, she said. Solon smiled faintly. That's a very polite way to say I make bad decisions. It is an accurate way. I appreciate that. Another pause. Then quieter. You're very thorough, by the way. Vexa tilted her head slightly. That is my function. Yeah, he said. But most people stop asking after the third broken bone. She held his gaze for a moment. Most people, she said, do not present with 21. Solon exhaled slowly. Fair. The instruments retracted slightly, their work in this phase complete. The fractures were more stable now, still imperfect, but no longer chaotic. Vexa turned back to the console, reviewing the updated scans. Something had changed, not just in the data, in her. She found herself lingering. Not because the procedure required it, because she wanted to see what came next. Behind her, Solon shifted slightly, testing his breathing again. He inhaled, paused, then nodded to himself. Okay, he said quietly. That's slightly better. Vexa did not turn, but she heard it, and for reasons she could not fully explain, that mattered more than it should have. The medical bay had grown quieter, but not in the usual way. The steady rhythm of machines still filled the air. Diagnostic drones still glided in slow arcs, and distant voices still echoed through filtered channels. But around Solon's platform, something had shifted. The space felt occupied, not by urgency, but by attention. Vexa stood at the console again, yet her hands had slowed. The scans were complete for now. The data had been recorded, categorized, stored. There was no immediate procedural reason for her to remain, and yet she did not leave. Instead, she brought up his file again. Mission logs flickered into existence, fragmented, inconsistent, often incomplete. Reports marked with phrases like structural collapse, environmental failure, hostile overwhelm. Each one ending the same way. Survival probability, negligible, and yet each one followed by a single update. Recovered. Vexa narrowed her eyes slightly, expanding one of the logs. A battlefield on a shattered asteroid colony. Atmosphere failing. Gravity unstable. Casualties listed in precise numbers. Solon's name appeared at the bottom. Status, returned. No elaboration. She opened another. A deep space relay station breach. Internal pressure loss. Evacuation incomplete. Again. Returned. Behind her, Solon shifted slightly, watching the ceiling with mild interest. You know, he said after a moment, it's usually a bad sign when someone reads your file that carefully. Vexa did not turn. Your file is inconsistent. Yeah, he said. It does that. She scrolled further, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly. These records lack detail. That's because I'm not very detailed, he replied. That is not how mission documentation functions. It is if you don't write anything down. The assistant drone emitted a soft tone. Clarification, incomplete reporting is a violation of... Yeah, Solon interrupted gently. I've been meaning to get around to that. The drone paused, then logged the statement as non-committal. Vexa finally turned, her gaze sharp. You have survived multiple scenarios classified as non-recoverable. Solon looked at her, blinking once. That sounds dramatic. It is accurate. He considered that for a moment, then nodded. Okay, fair. Vexa stepped closer, folding one arm behind her back while the other adjusted the projection. Explain. Solon tilted his head slightly. Explain what? The method by which you continue to survive. He thought about it, not for long. I try not to die, he said. The silence that followed was substantial. The assistant drone made a small clicking sound, as if attempting to process the answer, and failing. Vexa stared at him. That is not a method. It's worked so far. That is not sufficient explanation. Solon shifted slightly, wincing as his body reminded him of its current condition. He adjusted his position with care, then looked back at her. I don't know what you want me to say, he said. Things go wrong. I deal with it. How? He paused again, this time longer. Then he gave a small shrug. You keep moving. Vex's gaze did not waver. That is not a strategy. That is Persistence without structure. Sounds about right. She studied him carefully, searching for something beneath the simplicity of his answers. There had to be more. Training, instinct, something measurable. But there was nothing. No pattern she could define, no system she could map. Just continuation. She turned back to the console, pulling up a different set of data, biometric recordings from previous missions, heart rate spikes, stress responses, neural activity. They were there, but they resolved differently. Where others showed escalation, breakdown, collapse, his stabilized, not quickly, not efficiently, but consistently. Vexa's fingers slowed over the interface. That's the face again, Solon said. She did not look at him. What face? The one where you're trying to figure out if I'm broken or just confusing. You are both, he smiled faintly. That seems fair. Vexa adjusted the display again, isolating a neural pattern. It repeated across multiple missions, moments of extreme stress followed by clarity. Not calm, not exactly, but something close. Adaptation, not trained, earned. She exhaled slowly. This is not normal. Solon nodded. I've heard that before. You should not have survived these events. Yeah, he said. That part keeps coming up. Vexa turned again, stepping closer to the platform. Her gaze fixed on him, more direct now, less filtered through clinical distance. Why? She asked, her voice quieter. Do you continue? Solon blinked at her. Continue what? Operating, engaging, surviving. He frowned slightly as if the question itself required more effort than the answer. Then slowly he said, because I'm still there. Vex's expression shifted, just slightly. That is not sufficient reasoning. It is if you're the one there, he replied. The words settled into the space between them. Simple, uncomplicated, and somehow difficult to dismiss. The assistant drone remained completely silent now. Vexa held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned away again, her movements slower than before. She minimized the projections, but did not close them. Behind her, Solon exhaled softly, letting his head rest back against the platform. After a moment, he spoke again. So, he said, am I your most confusing patient? Vexa paused. Then, without turning, yes. A small smile formed on his face. Nice, he murmured. The next phase of treatment began without announcement, but the room itself seemed to prepare for it. The ambient light shifted slightly warmer, and a new set of instruments descended. Sleeker, more delicate, their surfaces reflecting faint pulses of violet energy. Unlike the previous tools, these did not hum. They whispered. Solon watched them with mild suspicion. Those look expensive, he said. They are precise, Vexa corrected. Yeah, that's usually code for expensive. The assistant drone hovered closer, scanning the instruments. Cost index, extremely high. Solon nodded. See? Even your robot agrees with me. I am not a robot. Sorry, emotionally reserved floating expert. The drone paused. That classification is acceptable. Vexa ignored them both, though one ear angled slightly, betraying the faintest distraction. She adjusted the controls and the instruments aligned above Solon's torso, focusing on deeper internal damage. This phase will address internal structural inconsistencies, she said. That sounds like a personality diagnosis, Solon replied. It is not. Shame. I've had a few of those. The first emitter activated, releasing a narrow beam that passed through his body without visible resistance. The scan projected outward, revealing layers beneath layers, microfractures in tissue, compressed nerve pathways, subtle misalignments that had gone unnoticed before. Vexa studied the projection closely. This should not be functional, she said. Solon exhaled slowly. You keep saying that. It remains true. Yeah, but here we are. The beam intensified. His body reacted immediately, muscles tightening, breath catching for a brief moment before he forced it steady again. That one's memorable, he muttered. Describe the sensation. Like my organs are being politely rearranged. Vexa paused for half a second. They are. Of course they are. The assistant drone logged the exchange under accurate but unhelpful descriptions. Vexa adjusted the frequency, narrowing the focus. The projection sharpened, highlighting areas where internal damage had healed without proper alignment. Small, almost invisible flaws that, over time, would accumulate into failure. "You have adapted to suboptimal conditions," she said. Salon nodded faintly. "I've been called worse. This is not a compliment." I didn't take it as one. She increased the intensity again, and this time the reaction was stronger. His hand tightened slightly against the edge of the platform, fingers curling just enough to reveal the strain. "You may vocalize discomfort," Vexa said without looking at him. "I am," he replied. "You are not. I'm doing it internally, very loud." The drone emitted a soft tone. "Internal vocalization does not produce measurable sound." "Exactly," Solon said. "Very efficient." Vexa's lips pressed together again, that same almost expression flickering and disappearing. She shifted focus to his neural pathways, mapping the way his body processed pain. It was unusual. The signals were strong, clear, unfiltered, but his response remained controlled. Not suppressed, not dulled, accepted. She adjusted the scan, isolating the pattern. "Your neural response does not escalate as expected," she said. Solon glanced at her. "Is that bad?" "It is. Atypical." "Yeah, I get that a lot." Vexa stepped closer, her gaze narrowing slightly as she observed the subtle shifts in his expression, the way his breathing adjusted without panic, without resistance. "You are not resisting the pain," she said. "No," he replied simply. "Why?" Solon thought about that. Then he shrugged. Again, a minimal motion. "Doesn't help." Vexa blinked once. That answer was not in any of her models. She returned to the console, her movements slower now, more deliberate. The instruments continued their work, stabilizing internal structures, reinforcing weakened areas with controlled energy pulses. This was not a full repair. It could not be. His body would reject perfection. It had learned to survive imperfection instead. "You are compensating," she said quietly. Solon tilted his head slightly. "For what?" "For everything." He considered that for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds about right." The room fell quiet again, but not empty. The hum of the frigate seemed softer here, as if the space itself was listening. Vexa adjusted the final sequence, and the instruments began to retract, their work in this phase complete. The projection stabilized, showing a version of his internal structure that was improved, still flawed, but less chaotic. She studied it for a moment longer, then closed the display halfway. Behind her, Solon shifted carefully, testing the changes. He inhaled slowly, then exhaled, his expression thoughtful. "Okay," he said. "That's definitely better." Vexa did not turn immediately. Instead, she asked, "Define better." He thought about it. "Less sharp." She nodded once, as if that was sufficient. Then, after a pause, "You will require continued treatment." Solon looked at her. "For how long?" Vexa hesitated, not because she didn't know, because she did. "A sufficient duration," she said. He smiled faintly. "That's not very specific." "It is accurate." He let out a quiet breath, then nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll try not to break anything new while I'm here." Vexa finally turned, her gaze steady. "That would be preferable." Solon's smile widened just slightly. "No promises." And for the first time, Vexa did not immediately object. Time passed in a way that did not quite behave like time. The medical frigate drifted in silent orbit, its systems running with mechanical certainty. But inside the bay, the rhythm had changed. Treatments came in phases, measured, precise, spaced apart with calculated intervals. Enough to stabilize, not enough to fully restore. Vexa had designed it that way. Solon noticed. "You're pacing it," he said one cycle, watching the soft glow of a diagnostic field ripple across his arm. "I am optimizing recovery." "That's not what I meant." Vexa did not look up from the console. "Clarify." "You're slowing it down," he said. "Not a lot, just enough." The assistant drone turned slightly, as if this observation had weight. Vexa's fingers paused for a fraction of a second. then continued. You are not in a condition to tolerate full reconstruction, she said evenly. Maybe, Solon replied, but that's not why. Silence stretched between them, thin but noticeable. The drone emitted a quiet tone. Analysis, patient is making an inference. I noticed, Vexa said. Solon shifted slightly, testing the range of his arm again. The movement was smoother now, less restrained by sharp edges of pain. He flexed his fingers, then nodded faintly to himself. Feels strange, he said. Improved, Vexa corrected. Yeah, he said. That's the strange part. Vexa adjusted the scan, watching the internal structures respond to movement. The improvements were holding, the reinforcements were integrating, but something else was happening, something she had not predicted. He was adjusting, not just physically. The absence of constant strain, the removal of sharp, persistent damage, was creating a different kind of imbalance. She brought up his neural readings again. There it was, a subtle shift. You are compensating differently, she said. Solon glanced at her. That sounds ominous. It is observational. Still sounds ominous. Vexa stepped closer, studying the projection more carefully. His body had built patterns around damage, micro-adjustments, unconscious corrections, entire systems adapted to imperfection. Now that those imperfections were being reduced, the patterns had nowhere to go. You are accustomed to operating under strain, she said. Solon thought about that. Yeah, he admitted. It's kind of my thing. It should not be. Probably not. Another pause. Then more quietly. But it is. Vexa's gaze shifted from the projection to him. That was the part she could not map. Not the injuries, not the adaptations, but the acceptance. Most beings resisted their condition, fought it, denied it. He integrated it. The assistant drone hovered closer, scanning his vitals. Neural variants detected. I see it, Vexa said. Solon looked between them. That sounds like something I should be worried about. It is not critical, Vexa replied. Good, he said. I'm trying to limit those. She adjusted the interface again, isolating the variants. It was minor, subtle, but consistent, a system recalibrating without its usual constraints. You are experiencing reduced resistance, she said. Solon blinked. That sounds like a good thing. It is unfamiliar. Ah, he said. That explains it. Vexa tilted her head slightly. Explain. When things stop hurting, he said, you notice everything else. The words settled into the space between them. Vexa did not respond immediately. She returned her attention to the display, but her movements had slowed again. Behind her, Solon let his head rest back, staring at the ceiling. The soft lights above reflected faintly in his eyes. After a moment, he spoke again. You ever notice that? He asked. Vexa did not turn. Notice what? That when something's been wrong for a long time, he said, and then it isn't, it feels wrong anyway. The assistant drone emitted a soft tone. Statement contains paradox. Yeah, Solon said. I get that a lot too. Vexa's fingers hovered over the console, then stilled. She turned fully this time, her gaze settling on him with a focus that was no longer purely clinical. That is not a physiological response, she said. No, he agreed, it's not. Then it is irrelevant to treatment. Solon smiled faintly. You keep telling yourself that. For a moment, the room felt very still, not empty, not quiet, just still. Vexa studied him, her expression unchanged, but something beneath it shifting in ways she could not categorize. You are adapting, she said. Solon nodded. I always am. That is not sustainable. It hasn't stopped me yet. That is not a metric for success. It's the only one I've got. The assistant drone remained silent now. Even it seemed to understand that this part did not belong in its logs. Vexa turned away again, but this time she did not return to the console immediately. She stood there, still, as if recalibrating something that had nothing to do with the systems around her. Behind her, Solon shifted slightly, testing his breathing again. In, out, no sharp edge, no immediate resistance. He frowned. Then after a moment, he said quietly, "Hey." Vexa did not move. "Yes, this is going to sound weird. That is consistent." He smiled slightly at that. Then, "What happens when I leave?" The question lingered, not as a medical concern, not as a logistical one. Something else. Vexa did not answer right away. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, unfocused for the first time since he had arrived. Finally, she said, "You will continue to operate." Solon nodded slowly. "Yeah." A pause, then softer. "Same as before?" Vexa hesitated, just for a moment. Then, "That depends on you." Solon looked at her, studying her profile, the slight angle of her long ear, the stillness in her posture. Then he exhaled quietly. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I was afraid of." And for reasons she could not fully define, that answer stayed with her longer than anything else he had said. The final scan completed without hesitation. For the first time since Solon had been brought into the bay, the system did not pause, did not flicker, did not attempt to reinterpret what it was seeing. The projection stabilized into something coherent, still marked with imperfections, still bearing the history of everything he had endured, but no longer chaotic. Vexa stood in front of the display, silent. Behind her, Solon sat upright on the platform, testing the slow rotation of his shoulder. The movement was controlled now, not effortless, but not sharp, not fractured. He paused midway, then finished the motion and nodded to himself. "All right," he said. "That's new." The assistant drone hovered beside him, scanning in short intervals. "Mobility has increased by 32%. "Only 32? Solon asked. "Feels like at least 35. That is not supported by data. Data lacks imagination. It lacks error." Solon smiled faintly. "Same thing sometimes." Vexa did not turn immediately. Her gaze remained on the final projection, tracing the lines of corrected fractures, the stabilized structures, the subtle reinforcements that would hold, at least for a while. It was complete. Not perfect, but complete. She reached out and closed the display with a precise motion. The light collapsed into nothing, leaving only the quiet hum of the frigate behind. "You are cleared for departure," she said. The words settled into the room. Solon didn't respond right away. Instead, he swung his legs carefully off the platform, his boots touching the floor with a soft, grounded sound. He stood there for a moment, adjusting his balance. Not because he needed to, but because he was noticing it. That was different. He took a step, then another. No hesitation. No sharp interruption. He exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "That's, definitely different." The assistant drone recorded the statement, then paused as if uncertain whether to categorize it as medical or personal. Vexa finally turned. Her gaze settled on him, not scanning, not measuring, observing. "You will require continued awareness of your limitations," she said. Solon nodded. "Yeah, I'll try to remember I have those." "That would be advisable." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled slightly. "You're very consistent." "It is efficient." "Yeah," he said, "but also kind of reassuring." Vexa did not respond to that. Instead, she stepped forward, extending a small data interface. "Your updated medical profile." Solon took it, glancing at the glowing surface. Lines of information scrolled across it. Structured, precise, far more detailed than anything he had ever bothered to read about himself. He nodded once. "Looks important." "It is. I will definitely look at it." The assistant drone emitted a quiet tone. "Probability of review, low." Solon glanced at it. "Hey, I have intentions." "Intentions are not actions." "Give me time." Vexa watched the exchange, her expression unchanged, but her silence was different now. Less distant, less absolute. Solon slipped the interface into his gear, then looked back at her. There was a pause, not awkward, just present. "So," he said, "that's it?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Okay." Another pause. Then he shifted his weight slightly, as if considering something. "You're going to keep my file open, aren't you?" Vex's eyes narrowed just a fraction. That is standard procedure. Yeah, he said, but this feels less standard. She did not answer immediately, because it wasn't. Solon smiled faintly. It's all right, I don't mind. That is not a factor. I know, he turned slightly, glancing toward the exit of the bay. The doors stood closed for now, waiting. Then he looked back at her. For what it's worth, he said, this helped. Vexa tilted her head slightly. That is the intended outcome. Yeah, he said, but I mean, more than that. The words lingered, not defined, not categorized, but clear. For the first time, Vexa did not try to reduce them to something measurable. She simply nodded once. Understood. Solon held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost casual salute. Try not to look so shocked next time, he said. I'm very breakable. There was a pause, and then, just slightly, Vexa smiled. Not fully, not openly, but enough. I will adjust expectations, she said. Solon nodded, satisfied with that. Then he turned and began walking toward the exit. His steps were steady, not forced, not compensating, just forward. The doors parted as he approached, the sterile light of the corridor beyond spilling into the bay. He didn't stop, didn't hesitate, but just before he crossed the threshold, he paused, only for a second. Then without turning, he said, Hey. Vexa looked up. Yeah? If I come back, he said, try not to let it get this bad again. The assistant drone emitted a soft tone. Statement implies future injury. Solon shrugged slightly. I like to stay realistic. Vexa watched him. Then after a moment, I will intervene earlier. He smiled. Good. And then he was gone. The doors closed behind him with a soft, final sound. The bay returned to its rhythm, the hum of machines, the quiet movement of drones. Everything as it had been. Except, it wasn't. Vexa stood there for a moment longer, her gaze fixed on the space where he had been. Then she turned back to the console. His file was still open. She could have closed it, archived it, marked it as complete. Instead, she adjusted the display, reviewing it again. Not for errors, not for missed data, but for understanding. The assistant drone hovered closer. Doctor, case status. Vexa paused. Then slowly, ongoing. The drone processed this. Clarification, patient has been discharged. Yes. Then the case is complete. Vexa's fingers hovered over the interface, then stilled. No, she said quietly. And for the first time in her career, that answer did not feel like a deviation. It felt correct.